Some horror films fade with time. Others rot into history and refuse to die. These are not comfort classics or nostalgic scares. They are cinematic scars restored decades later to remind audiences how far filmmakers once went. When lost footage resurfaces and censored cuts are repaired, the horror does not soften, it sharpens. These 13 films remain disturbing because restoration did not save them. It exposed them. Number 13. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. When Night of the Living Dead first screened in 1968, audiences were not warned. There were no ratings, no safety rails. Children sat through scenes of cannibalism, despair, and social collapse that felt too real to process. George A. Romero did not invent the zombie movie. He weaponized it. What looked like a low-budget monster film became a brutal mirror of American violence, racial tension, and institutional failure. Restored editions returned the film to its raw, monochrome nightmare. The grain is heavier, the shadows are deeper, the violence feels closer. Flesh-tearing sound design that once vanished in degraded prints now lands with shocking clarity. The farmhouse siege plays like a documentary about survival turning into self-destruction. Every argument feels fatal, every gunshot feels final. The ending remains one of the most disturbing conclusions in horror history. The restored image does not soften its impact, it clarifies it. A black protagonist survives the undead only to be casually executed by armed civilians. The final still images resemble lynching photographs. In restoration, the symbolism becomes unavoidable. Romero was not subtle. He was furious. Night of the Living Dead remains unforgettable because it refuses escapism. The restoration proves this was never pulp horror. It was a social autopsy filmed before America realized it was already bleeding. Number 12. Don't Look Now, 1973. Do Not Look Now is not frightening because of what it shows. It is terrifying because of what it withholds. Nicholas Roeg crafted a film about grief so intimate and disorienting that restoration only deepens its emotional cruelty. The death of a child is not an opening shock. It is a wound that bleeds through every frame. Restored cuts preserve the infamous intimacy scene in full, not for exploitation, but for honesty. The scene intercuts sex with the couple dressing afterward. Time collapses. Love and loss blur together. In restoration, the editing rhythm becomes clearer and more devastating. This is not eroticism, it is desperation disguised as connection. Venice becomes a maze of whetstone red coats and echoing footsteps. The restored visuals sharpen reflections and shadows, making the city feel alive and hostile. Water imagery surrounds the characters like a curse they cannot outrun. The final revelation lands with surgical cruelty. Horror erupts not from violence, but from inevitability. Do Not Look now remains disturbing because it understands grief as a trap. Restoration does not polish the film, it tightens it. The fear is not in the jump scare. It is in realizing the future was sealed the moment the loss occurred. Number 11. Blood Feast, 1963. Blood Feast did not invent gore, it declared war on taste. Herschel Gordon Lewis set out to show what mainstream cinema refused to depict. The result was crude, shocking, and unapologetically offensive. In restored editions, the film becomes even harder to dismiss. The colors are brighter, the blood thicker, the violence impossible to ignore. What makes Blood Feast disturbing is not realism. It is audacity. Human organs are torn out in prolonged close-ups. The acting is wooden, the dialogue absurd. Yet the violence lingers because it feels forbidden. Restoration removes the murk that once softened these moments. The film now plays like an open challenge to the audience. Lewis understood spectacle. He wanted reactions, not respect. The restored cut proves how calculated the excess was. Each kill escalates. Each effect dares the viewer to walk out. In the 1960s, audiences did. Many never forgot it. Blood Feast survives because it crossed a line cinema pretended did not exist. Restoration does not elevate it. It exposes its role as the moment horror stopped asking permission. Number 10. Eraserhead, 1977. Eraserhead is not a horror film in the traditional sense. It is a nightmare that refuses interpretation. David Lynch created something closer to a psychological endurance test than a narrative movie. For years, damaged prints dulled its textures and softened its impact. Restoration changed that completely. The restored image sharpens every industrial shadow and every suffocating interior. The black and white photography now feels endless and oppressive. The sound design becomes unbearable by design. Machinery hums like breathing walls. Silence stretches until it feels hostile. The apartment no longer looks strange. It looks uninhabitable. The deformed infant remains one of the most disturbing creations in film history. Restoration does not clarify what it is. It clarifies how long you are forced to stare at it. Parenthood becomes body horror. Responsibility becomes punishment. Henry is trapped in a domestic hell that offers no escape and no explanation. What makes Eraserhead unforgettable is how restoration reveals intent. This was never meant to be obscure art. It was meant to be experienced physically. The anxiety is constant. There are no safe scenes. Even moments of calm feel poisoned. Decades later, Eraserhead still feels like a transmission from a broken future. Restoration does not make it accessible. It makes it louder, clearer, and more relentless. The horror is not in monsters. It is in existing. Number 9. Martin, 1977. Martin is George A. Romero at his most cruel and restrained. Unlike his zombie films, this story removes spectacle and replaces it with doubt. Is Martin a vampire or a delusional young man raised inside abuse and religious fanaticism? Restoration restores more than footage. It restores ambiguity. Earlier cuts trimmed character moments and softened pacing. The restored version lets scenes breathe. Silence becomes accusatory. Violence feels sudden and deeply uncomfortable. Martin does not hunt like a monster. He stalks like a lost child mimicking something he barely understands. The suburban setting is critical. There are no castles or foggy streets. There are grocery stores, basements, and television glow. Restoration sharpens the contrast between mundane life and ritualistic violence. Blood does not feel gothic. It feels invasive. Romero forces the audience into moral paralysis. Martin may be dangerous. He may also be a victim. The restored ending lands with devastating finality. There is no triumph. There is only erasure. Martin remains disturbing because it refuses easy answers. Restoration proves this was never a vampire story. It was a portrait of how belief can destroy a person and how society prefers execution over understanding. Number 8. The Devils, 1971. The Devils remains one of the most censored films ever made. Even today, no fully restored version has been officially released. What exists are partial restorations and recovered scenes that hint at the film Ken Russell intended. Those fragments are enough to make it unforgettable. The Devils is not subtle. It is loud, blasphemous, and furious. Religious hysteria, political manipulation, and sexual repression collide inside a city that feels staged for ritual destruction. Restoration enhances the stark white sets, turning the world into a sterile nightmare where madness spreads uncontested. Oliver Reed delivers a performance that feels dangerous. Vanessa Redgrave embodies fanaticism with terrifying calm. Restored footage emphasizes how accusations replace truth and how spectacle becomes justification for torture. The infamous possession scenes remain shocking not because of nudity, but because of intention. Faith is weaponized. Bodies become evidence. Restoration clarifies that this is not provocation for its own sake. It is indictment. The Devils endures because censorship failed to bury it. Every restored fragment reinforces how threatening the film still is. It exposes power using morality as camouflage. That message remains too dangerous to fully release even now. Number 7. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS exists at the intersection of exploitation, shock, and historical nightmare. It was never meant to educate or comfort. It was designed to provoke outrage and curiosity in equal measure. Decades later, restoration makes the film harder to dismiss and harder to endure. What once looked like sleazy excess now reads as a document of how exploitation cinema weaponized taboo. The restored editions sharpen lighting and stabilize scenes that once felt chaotic. Uniforms appear cleaner. The camp looks more clinical. This clarity makes the cruelty more unsettling. Ilsa is not portrayed as chaotic evil. She is methodical. Experiments are conducted with cold detachment. Violence is framed as routine procedure rather than emotional outburst. What makes the film disturbing is not just its subject matter, but its tone. It presents atrocity without moral distance. There is no guiding hand telling the viewer how to feel. Restoration removes visual decay that once acted as a buffer. The suffering feels closer, the gaze more complicit. Ilsa. She-Wolf of the SS survives in horror history because it crossed ethical boundaries mainstream cinema would not approach. It exploited history in ways that remain uncomfortable to acknowledge. Restoration does not redeem it. It exposes the raw mechanics of shock cinema and forces audiences to confront why these images were ever marketable. This film is remembered not for quality but for transgression. Restoration ensures that transgression remains visible, undiluted, and impossible to forget. Number 6. The Hills Have Eyes, 1977. The Hills Have Eyes is a survival nightmare stripped of fantasy and mercy. Wes Craven abandoned supernatural threats and replaced them with something more frightening: people. The restored editions of the film deepen its brutality by clarifying every sun-scorched frame and every moment of escalating desperation. The desert setting becomes a character in restoration. Colors burn harsher, shadows offer no protection. The Carter family feels exposed from the moment they stop the car. Violence arrives suddenly and without ceremony. Craven does not choreograph heroics, he documents collapse. Restored cuts emphasize the symmetry between victim and predator. As the family fights back, they become indistinguishable from the cannibals hunting them. Morality erodes under heat and fear. The final acts feel less like victory and more like contamination. What makes The Hills Have Eyes unforgettable is its refusal to provide comfort. Restoration enhances sound design so screams echo longer and gunshots feel heavier. The desert absorbs everything, including dignity. The film argues that civilization is a thin layer easily stripped away. Restoration proves that argument was always central. This is not a monster movie, it is a warning. When survival becomes the only law, humanity disappears fast. Number 5. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. I Spit on Your Grave remains one of the most divisive films ever made. Restoration reignited that debate rather than settling it. The restored cuts reintroduce footage long censored, including prolonged assault sequences that many find unbearable. The intent remains contested, but the impact is undeniable. The film presents violence without stylization. There is no dramatic score guiding emotion. The camera lingers uncomfortably. Restoration removes blur and damage that once obscured faces and reactions. The cruelty feels immediate, personal, exhausting. The second half transforms into a revenge narrative, but restoration emphasizes how little relief it offers. The vengeance is methodical and cruel. The protagonist does not regain innocence. She adopts brutality as a language she never wanted to learn. What makes the film disturbing is its emotional flatness. There is no catharsis. Restoration sharpens this void. The killings do not feel triumphant, they feel transactional. Damage answering damage. I Spit on Your Grave endures because it refuses to resolve its own morality. Restoration ensures audiences cannot hide behind technical flaws or historical distance. The film demands confrontation with what it shows and why it shows it. That demand remains as uncomfortable now as it was on first release. Number 4. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre has always been described as one of the most violent films ever made. What makes that reputation disturbing is how little blood it actually shows. Restoration reveals the true horror was never gore. It was atmosphere control and psychological suffocation executed with precision. The restored editions enhance grain, sweat, and sound. Heat radiates from the screen. The constant hum of insects' engines and screaming metal becomes unbearable. Leatherface feels less like a movie monster and more like a force of nature unleashed inside a collapsing rural nightmare. His movements are awkward, panicked, and desperate. Restoration makes him feel frighteningly human. The Sawyer house becomes a chamber of sensory assault. Bones hang like trophies. Furniture feels assembled from history and rot. Restoration sharpens every texture, turning the set into an archaeological site of madness. The dinner scene becomes nearly unwatchable, not because of violence, but because of sustained cruelty and humiliation. What endures is the sense of being trapped without escape or logic. The film never explains its villains. It does not moralize. Restoration preserves the documentary feel that once caused audiences to believe it was real. That illusion remains intact. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre survives because it understands fear as exhaustion. Restoration proves the terror was never exaggerated. It was carefully engineered, and it still works. Number 3. Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Salò is not a horror film meant to entertain. It is a deliberate assault constructed to indict power without mercy. Pier Paolo Pasolini adapted De Sade not for shock alone, but to expose how authority transforms people into objects. Restoration makes that intent impossible to ignore. The restored image is pristine and cold. Costumes are immaculate, settings are symmetrical and controlled. This visual order makes the atrocities feel even more obscene. There is no chaos. Everything is scheduled. Suffering is organized. Salò removes emotion from cruelty. Acts of degradation are presented with bureaucratic calm. Restoration enhances the stillness and silence surrounding each abuse. There is no release, no rebellion, only repetition and compliance. What makes Salò unforgettable is its refusal to offer narrative justice. The ending does not punish the powerful, it documents them. Restoration clarifies Pasolini's thesis. Fascism is not loud rage, it is polite ritual. The film remains disturbing because it implicates the viewer. Restoration sharpens that accusation. You are not watching horror. You are witnessing how systems consume humanity while maintaining decorum. Number 2. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Cannibal Holocaust remains one of the most infamous films ever made. Restoration returned footage so extreme its director was arrested on release. The controversy has never faded because the images remain confrontational even decades later. The restored editions present the found footage structure with brutal clarity. Grain shifts deliberately. Sound cuts abruptly. Violence feels accidental and uncontrolled. The animal killings remain real and impossible to distance from. Restoration removes doubt and replaces it with certainty. What elevates the film beyond exploitation is its accusation. The civilized documentarians commit worse atrocities than the tribes they film. Restoration emphasizes this hypocrisy. Cameras become weapons. Documentation becomes violation. The final reels are devastating because they expose how media frames brutality for profit. The restored sound design makes screams echo longer. The jungle feels alive and hostile. Cannibal Holocaust endures because it asks an uncomfortable question. Who is the real monster? Restoration ensures that question still wounds. Number 1. The Last House on the Left, 1972. The Last House on the Left was Wes Craven's first feature and remains one of his most punishing. Restoration returned footage that early censors tried to erase. What remains is a film that feels less like fiction and more like an incident captured on tape. The restored image enhances its rawness. Handheld shots feel unstable. Performances feel unscripted. Violence unfolds without cinematic rhythm. There is no relief and no beauty. The most disturbing aspect is the tonal whiplash. Moments of brutality are followed by awkward humor and police incompetence. Restoration makes this clash more apparent and more disturbing. Reality does not respect tone, and neither does this film. The revenge finale offers no satisfaction. Parents become executioners, not heroes. Restoration clarifies the moral void. Violence begets violence without resolution. The Last House on the Left remains unforgettable because it destroys the boundary between viewer and event. Restoration did not make it better. It made it impossible to look away from what it always was. These restored horrors survive because time failed to soften them. Restoration did not redeem their images or excuse their cruelty. It revealed intention. These films endure not as relics but as warnings. They remind us how cinema can wound when it refuses comfort and refuses forgiveness.